In these grammatical studies, we are going to use as our text the book of Acts, which is a bit more of a literary Greek than some of the other sections of the New Testament. Luke and Gospel of Luke and Acts employs a more literary style, as well as the author of Hebrews. So it serves as a wonderful seedbed, not only of great truth about what God is doing, but also to really stretch our Greek a bit. So let's jump right into it, Acts 1:1-3, and let's look at verse 1 in this video. Luke says ton, okay, proton logon, epoi samen peripanton o theophile hon erxata ha Jesus poien te kai didaskein. Just a translation, the former book I made, O Theophilus, concerning all things which Jesus began both to do and to teach. Now let's look at it a little bit closer. Right away, we are faced with a little bit of a surprise, since the default order of a Hellenistic Greek sentence is verb, subject, and object. Right away, we notice that Luke fronts the object, ton logon, and what we have here is an object, subject, and verb order. Now, this does not mean that verb, subject, or object is the correct order and object, subject, verb is the incorrect order. Not at all. It means that when the default is changed to another order, we ought to ask why. And here, I think it's pretty evident that what Luke is doing here by fronting the ton logon, the direct object of the verb epoisamein, is to call attention to the previous work that he did. And of course, that work is what we know as the Gospel of Luke. He even uses this adverb here, proton, to refer to that. So the fronting not only presents a topical frame for the subject that he's going to be talking about in this book, but it also refers back, I believe, to that first book. The word proton is in classical Greek oftentimes means first in the sense of first, second, and third. And there have been even some authors who have suggested that the use of this proton is because Luke intended to write not only a second, but a third and a fourth, maybe a multi-volume history of the early church. But that's really overstating the meaning of proton, because in Koine Greek, proton had begun to be almost synonymous at times with the Greek word proteros, which means former. So I think it's a legitimate translation to say here, the former book I have made concerning all things Theophilus, which Jesus began both to do and to teach. This also, we should not ignore the little particle man. Man is often untranslated and untranslatable, but it usually functions to point forward in some way. Oftentimes, man is balanced by the little word de in a man de expression where it's looking forward. But there is no need for the de in the Gospel of Luke, because the proton obviously is referring back to the former, and it's implying the latter. And Donker even says there's no need for the de, because Luke's readers would pick up that there's another volume coming. Just a little bit more word about logos. We teach students that it means word, and the English word is usually an individual lexeme, but that is never the meaning of logon. It means discourse, it means message, and here it can mean a whole book. Not the former word I made, but the former book or discourse I made concerning all things Theophilus. A little bit about these verbs here. So let's look at some parsings here. Epoisamein is the aorist middle indicative, first singular poieo, and we should notice that it is the middle voice here, not the active voice. The middle voice implies a greater role of the author. So I think we could, if not say, we should understand Luke to saying, I myself made this former word or former discourse. Erxita is the aorist middle indicative, third singular archo, and then the two infinitives that follow are poiein, present active infinitives from poieo and didasco. Now let's look back here. Notice that erxata has two infinitives that follow it. We actually call this the complementary infinitives because they complete erxata. As a matter of fact, the verb arkamai almost always is one of those verbs that almost always takes infinitives that follow it. So here we have the former book I made, O Theophilus, about all things which Jesus began both to do and to teach. Now, one other expression here we should notice, te kai. This means both and. So Jesus began both to do and to teach. Sometimes in the New Testament you don't see te kai, but you see kai, and we teach students usually to translate that both and that would be the idea here of te kai. Te kai is preferred by another literary writer, the writer of the book of Hebrews. Now, just one more thing before we leave verse 1. I want to call your attention right here to the relative pronoun hon. And I also want to call your attention in verse 2, though we won't say much about it, the relative pronoun hes. And here, the relative pronoun hus. Relative pronouns have antecedents, and in this case, hon has the antecedent pantone, all things which Jesus began to do and to teach. Now, let me just point out something that's different here, and that is the relative pronoun normally takes the case of the clause in which it's found. And in this situation, you would expect this to be in the accusative case. But it's not. As you can see, it's in the genitive case. Oftentimes students forget that the relative pronoun does not necessarily take the case of its antecedent, though it takes the gender and the number of its antecedent. So here is an exception. And what we call here, this is taking the case of its antecedent. This is called attraction. The attraction of the relative pronoun to its genitive plural here. All right, so now we're going to see this in anticipation in Acts 1:2 in our next video, that these are relative pronouns, and they're a little bit different from this relative pronoun, but we'll save that for Acts 1:2. Just one more thing before we move on here, and let's just create a little space here for writing. Now, notice the vocative here, and I'll change colors. The vocative here, O Theophile. Now, this corresponds very neatly to Luke 1:3, where in the first book, Luke addresses his reader as kratiste, most noble Theophile, and both of them are in the vocative case. Having addressed Theophilus with this title, kratiste, Luke does not see any need to repeat it in this one, so he simply says, O Theophile. All right, in conclusion, let's translate it again. this former book I made concerning all things, O Theophilus, which Jesus began both to do and to teach. In our next video, we'll be looking at Acts 1, 2.